Good morning, everyone. I'm Constance Sayers. I am the president of Government Executive Media Group. What a beautiful hotel. I mean, it's like every time I come down to downtown, which I try to get in every couple weeks, and it is, it's like changed drastically. I didn't even know this was here, so this is amazing. Beautiful venue, great conversation today, so thank you for joining us. It's my pleasure to welcome you to NextGov's Emerging Tech Summit. This summit is bringing together some of the brightest minds in technology and government to examine the biggest trends in the industry and explore how they have potential to fundamentally reshape the way government operates, interacts with its citizens, and achieves its mission. For those of you who are not familiar with NextGov, we are the technology and innovation publication of Government Executive Media Group. Also in our family of publications, we have Defense One and Route 50, which is our state and local publication. And NextGov is the most trusted information resource serving senior decision makers in government around technology. Central to our mission is exploring emerging technologies and their potential impact on government, which is exactly what we hope to do with you today. Through news, analysis, and insights from our award-winning journalists and a nationwide community of expert voices, NextGov provides the first word on technology and government. And if you haven't already, if you don't subscribe to the newsletter and you don't read NextGov's coverage, please check it out at nextgov.com. It's just a wonderful publication. So additional shameless promotion, if you are interested in conversations like the ones we're having today, I'd encourage you to attend our event next week called NextGov's Tech Talks, Artificial Intelligence Applications and Implications for Your Agency. This format's a little different than what you're going to have today. This is a roundtable breakfast. We've been doing a lot more of these where you, the audience, are part of the conversation versus a little more lecture series today. So in addition to hearing from a panel of government leaders, all attendees can participate in a roundtable discussion on an AI-related topic of their choice. So it's a great opportunity to share your perspectives on the work that your agency is doing in AI and hear best practices from expert leaders and peers. So this is all taking place on Tuesday, August 20th, and ask any of our staff about where the location and everything, and we'd love to have you attend that. But back to today. Just for a couple housekeeping issues, please just take a moment to silence your cell phones, but don't put them away. Throughout the event, I encourage you to continue these important conversations by sharing your thoughts and questions via the hashtag on Twitter, hashtag Emerging Tech Summit. That's hashtag Emerging Tech Summit. And today's event would not be possible. I know everyone says this, but it's so true, without the support of our underwriters who just have such great vision in this area as well. That is Accenture, Pluralsight, and Hootsuite. And also thank our partners at Decode. We partner with them on a lot of events, and they are just such a wonderful group of people for being our content partner with us on this event. So thank you for helping to bring this content together for the Emerging Tech Summit. So now I'm very honored to introduce our opening keynote speaker, Dr. Valerie Browning, Director of the Defense Sciences Office at Darpa, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. She's going to discuss Darpa's trailblazing national security research, and please join me in welcoming Dr. Browning to the stage.
So good morning. It really is my pleasure to be able to kick off today's Emerging Tech Summit. So many thanks to NextGov and your underwriters for this opportunity. You've probably heard the saying, necessity is the mother of invention. And if you subscribe to this philosophy, then it might seem reasonable to you that you could expect that agencies like mine, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, or DARPA, whose mission is to invest in technologies that can address either existing or anticipated future national security needs, we might be a good source for insight on emerging technologies that are going to shape and influence many aspects of our future lives. And in fact, there are many examples of where pressing national security needs have motivated new technology developments that have had really tremendous impact on both defense and civilian applications. So for example, after the Civil War, the need to modernize the U.S. Navy so that it could be competitive with other countries drove the transition from primarily sail-powered to coal-powered steamships. And then similarly later, leading up to World War I, the need to outdistance and persist the coal-powered ships drove the Great Britain's Royal Navy to initiate the transition to oil-fueled ships. In more modern times, The need for lighter weight, non-volatile, and radiation-hardened memories to serve the emerging U.S. satellite industry drove the development of new thin-film magnetic memory storage technologies that's now pervasive in all of our computers. Similarly, the need for a networked defense system that could survive during the Cold War a nuclear attack led to technology that ultimately enabled the development of what we called the ARPANET, and which was sort of the predecessor to what we have as our internet today. And as the AI became an emerging technology, the need to try and transition the smart machines to from being primarily tools to partners led to technology that ultimately ended up transitioning off into the Siri application that many of us are familiar with in our Apple phones. Now, not everyone agrees with this philosophy of necessity being the mother of invention. In fact, noted mathematician and philosopher Alfred North Whitehead in 1917 stated that the basis of invention is science. And science is almost wholly the outgrowth of pleasurable intellectual curiosity. So in reality, I think that both views are correct. In my experience, I often see that insights that are arising from scientific endeavors actually point the way towards new technology that ultimately ends up providing solutions to unmet needs. So if we go back to some of the examples I provided, the insight for this new magnetic memory that we now have in all of our hard drives was actually the discovery of the giant magnetoresistive effect in 1988, which ultimately led to Nobel Prize for two of the discoverers in 2007. Similarly, research exploring how data could be transmitted in blocks that could contain both a destination header and a payload led to development of technology, packet switching technology, which again was fundamental to a fundamental enabler of what eventually became the internet. So with respect to the topic of today's summit, if you want to look for potential opportunities as well as future impacts from emerging technologies, then a good place to start is to consider whether trajectories of new science or new scientific disciplines might intersect with the anticipated future needs of the national defense ecosystem. And in fact, that's exactly what we do at Darpa. Today, Darpa's mission remains the same as it was when it was established in 1958, a few months after the launch of the Soviet Sputnik satellite. DARPA makes pivotal investments in breakthrough technologies for national security in order to prevent the U.S. from being surprised by the technological innovation of another country while creating technological surprise for our U.S. adversaries. So with the rest of my time this morning, I'd like to give you a brief introduction to the DARPA mission, review a bit of history of DARPA innovation, and then focus on the unique role that my office, the Defense Sciences Office, plays in supporting the DARPA mission. And in particular, I'd like to provide you with some insight as to how we internally prioritize our investments from a mission-informed perspective in order to get out ahead of the agency to help identify and expand the art of the possible with respect to the game-changing technologies that might impact our national security. So with that, my first slide. So as I mentioned, DARPA was established in 1958 in response to the launch of the Sputnik satellite. It was a time of great angst and concern that another country, a perceived adversary, had achieved a technological achievement that we could not replicate. So over the course of the last 61 years, DARPA has made pivotal investments in technologies that ultimately transition to new capabilities. So if you look in the bottom, there's investments in material science, information technology, ARPANET, and ultimately the internet, microelectronics, and autonomy. And if you look along the top, you sort of see the applications that have been realized and impacted by these investments. And many of these, of course, have both national security as well as civilian implications. So the DARPA today is comprised of 6 technical offices. Most of the offices are built around specific either disciplines or capabilities, but my office is the DSO. We like to think of ourselves as being DARPA's DARPA. We are the most diverse office in terms of our people and our programs, and we tend to invest in the broadest landscape of technologies, and we're looking the most forward out. So within the context of DARPA's mission to invest in technology to create and prevent technological surprise, we see our role as being the nation's first line of defense against scientific surprise. So in the next few slides, I'd like to tell you about how we execute our mission in supporting the overall DARPA mission in terms of trying to inform the future strategies of the other offices in the agency. So what we can't do, and this is my philosophy for the office, is try and take our resources and just spread them across the entire landscape of technology, because if we do that, we're not going to move the needle anywhere. So total blue sky research is critically important for our country, and there are many billions of dollars being invested elsewhere in the government and even elsewhere in the DoD. So we see our job as looking across that landscape of important fundamental blue sky research and finding opportunities to take some of that research and move it in the direction of capabilities that address needs that we believe are going to challenge our national security either today or in the future. So the way we prioritize what we do is on an annual basis, we take a look at what is the global threat landscape and what are the trends that we think are going to most impact how we might fight in the future. And so in the next few slides, I'm going to talk about those trends and what the technology opportunities and priorities we believe arise out of those trends. And this is sort of an internal framework for us to help prioritize our investments, but it's also a way for us to justify when we talk to our stakeholders and our customers in the military services, this is why we are investing in the areas that we are. So the first trend that we care about is the globalization and democratization of technology. The U.S. for a long time had the luxury of having the most advanced technology in the world. That advantage has been slowly eroding, and some would argue in some cases we're now on par or maybe even behind other countries. Our adversaries continue to increase their investments, and so what this means for us is that we have to first acknowledge that fact, and then we have to think about how we can run faster. How do we stay ahead? How do we change how we innovate? How are we more agile in terms of taking innovation and actually putting it into practice? How can we be more adaptive in how we innovate and deploy technologies? And it also means that we have to think about, as we're innovating, the fact that our adversaries are right there alongside us as we are innovating. So from the very beginning, we have to be thinking about the counters of those technologies. So again, what this drives us to prioritize is anything that helps us to identify S&T opportunities that can be important to national security, and how we can find ways to prevent or slow our adversaries' ability of taking advantage of those same technologies. And this runs the gamut from the technologies themselves to how we actually procure and acquire innovation with our contractors. So we are thinking again from the fundamental research aspect to how we actually engage with the R&D community for these factors. The second trend that we consider is the fact that the operational environment and the operational tempos that our military is going to be engaged in is becoming increasingly complex, and things are happening at speeds that are increasingly fast. We have hypersonic weapons, we have directed energy weapons, we have electronic warfare, and all of this means that we need to be able to act and react much faster, oftentimes much faster than the human brain actually functions. And so this is going to drive us to relying more and more on machines that can process things faster. And so here we emphasize technologies that will allow us to better utilize those resources and to make better decisions faster. Again, our adversaries have these same challenges, and so this actually presents opportunities for us to think about technologies where, can we get inside their decision-making loop and make things less clear for them or slow their ability to make decisions. Here we look at new sensors and new sensor networks that give us better and more accurate situational awareness, better models of the environment, different ways of doing computing that might, again, provide us an advantage in being able to provide high-power computing in smaller, swap-constrained platforms, or, again, getting to better decisions faster. And, again, anything that we can do to impose complexity on our adversary. The third area that we consider is that the landscape of conflict has really expanded, and the range of missions that our military has to support have expanded. And while we often see this sort of two-dimensional expression of the landscape of conflict from lower intensity to higher intensity, the reality is this is a multi-dimensional problem. The how, the who, the why, intent, all of those things matter, and they have to figure into our decision-making process for how we are going to either respond to something that is happening to ourselves or our adversaries in a way that has the desired deterrent effect, or in a way that influences either our adversaries or our allies to behave in a way that is consistent with our interests. So there's a heavy emphasis here on better social behavioral science models. We really want to build out in this along this sort of thinking, the toolkit for options that either have the desired deterrent or in some cases stabilization effect on a time scale that is required for a lot of what we're having to face today. There's, we have a long list of actions that many of our adversaries are taking that are short of full conflict, but nevertheless they still have undesirable consequences for ourselves or our allies. So again, there's a heavy emphasis on social behavioral science tools, better understanding of our adversaries. We have a tendency to want to project our own values and thinking on and trying to understand why our adversaries might be doing something, and sometimes we don't get that right. So again, here, anything that allows us to understand the organizational structure of a particular region, anything that helps us identify who are the decision makers and who's influencing the decision makers, and again, anything that can support these types of stability and influence and deterrence operations. And then finally, we continue to see adversaries' desire to acquire and deploy weapons of mass destruction and weapons of mass terror. So this drives us to, again, look for new sensor and sensor network capabilities that can give us early warning so that we can either stop an attack or get a response in place as quickly as possible. Again, if we can understand our adversary's intent in deploying these weapons, maybe we can do something ahead of time to just frustrate that activity. And ultimately, here we look to invest in anything that, in the long run, what we really want to do is just take that threat off the table, make it so costly and challenging for the adversary to deploy these weapons that it's just not worth their while. So. Those four trends and these technology opportunities that I list here, again, that's the framework that we use to help prioritize how we spend our money within our office. again, to help inform the other offices' investment strategy. And we're not looking to inform them necessarily today. It's maybe 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Our investments are designed to give them options that they might not have had otherwise if we hadn't. But if we're going to go actually out and execute on these priorities, we need to have a more technology-focused organization of our portfolio to have a conversation with the R&D community. So if you actually go to our website and look at what DSO does, this is the outward-facing portfolio organization that's built around technology. So we have a limits of sensing and sensors thrust, and here we think about both practical limits as well as the theoretical limits, because we want to understand, the fundamental limits of what's possible, but we want to also make sure that our investments are targeting technologies that we ultimately believe can be put on a pathway towards being deployed into the hands of the warfighter. Again, our complex social systems, remember I talked about the need to better understand the adversary and their intents and their motivations. So we have a whole thrust area that's focused on developing new tools for social behavioral sciences to allow it to be better applied in the context of national security applications. We're also looking at, as we're seeing the emergence of heterogeneous human-machine teams, we actually don't have the resource planning tools and the mission planning tools to really optimally plan for those missions, particularly in real time and changing environments. So we have some of our effort under this thrust sort of looking to develop those tools. We have an anticipating surprise thrust, and this is really where we look at, when we're looking across that opportunity of new S&T opportunities that are bubbling up, and sometimes we will recognize that there's a very specific opportunity that meets a very specific challenge, either existing, emerging, or anticipated future. And oftentimes, when we bring those together, we're sort of alone in our thinking as to whether that's a good idea or not. So we will go after those sorts of more focused efforts. And if they pay off, oftentimes we will run very quickly to actually get those to a little bit further along in terms of a prototype demonstration, so that somebody else can then take it and move it towards a real capability. So our work on WMD and WMT detection and mitigation is funded under there. We have some very specific harsh material efforts that are looking to help us get ahead of the hypersonics technologies that are emerging elsewhere. A lot of our manufacturing work is done there too. And then we have a frontiers in math, computation, and design thrust. And this really supports across all of the other thrust areas. But here we're looking at, again, new ways of doing computing, new models. Many of you have probably heard that and are aware of the advances we've had in manufacturing, additive manufacturing, new materials. We can conceive of functionally graded materials that could potentially offer great improvements in performance of our platforms. But the reality is our modeling tools haven't kept up with the advances in those technologies. And so we have all of this great capability, but we're not really sure what it means in terms of next generation platforms. So we've been focused on trying to develop some of those tools. Artificial intelligence, again, we're still, the desire is to really move machines from being tools to collaborative partners, and there's a lot of work to be done to realize that vision. So a lot of our work in AI is under that thrust as well. So I'm going to leave a few minutes for questions, but I'd like to wrap up by finishing with this slide, and I think it really sort of characterizes the character of our office, our program managers, as well as the performers that we look to engage with, really thinking about game-changing science. This is true. I did verify it with Snopes. I mean, these are two entries that were made on the same day, one in the New York Times and one in the Orville Wright's diary. So, really challenging conventional thinking is something that that we challenge our program managers to do, and we challenge the community that we engage with. So I wanted to just, since this is an Emerging Tech Summit, talk about a few places where DARPA is making, not just in our office, but across the agency, some significant investments in technologies that I think are going to be game-changing, both for national security and for the civilian population. So again, AI, we announced back in September of 2018 our AI Next campaign, a $2 billion commitment over 5 years. To realize this vision of taking machines from tools to partners, and when you think about a collaborative partner, you want someone who is aware of their own abilities and limitations. So part of our effort is trying to develop the capability for machines to be introspective, understand based on its training and its experience whether a task that's being assigned to it is something that it likely can be successful at, or if not, recommend additional training or choose somebody else to the partner. You also want machines that recognize when the situation has changed, they're in a new environment, and can respond appropriately to those new situations. You want, in a collaborative partner, you want that partner to be able to explain to you in an understandable way why the partner is making a particular recommendation or taking a particular action. So we are looking to develop explainable artificial intelligence for that reason. We're also looking at trying to take the artificial intelligence and the machine learning technology that we have today and apply it in new applications. So we think that there's great opportunity to automate a number of tasks, anywhere from contracting, procurement, to security clearance vetting and monitoring. So we're looking at sort of what are the limits of what we have today and how we might apply that. In alternative computing, so we have an initiative, the Electronics Resurgence Initiative, that our Microsystems Technology Office is investing in. And here we're looking at sort of, we've enjoyed the luxury of Moore's Law scaling for many decades, but as that seems to be maybe sort of leveling off, what do we do beyond Moore's Law scaling in terms of making sure that the advancements in electronics continue and we enjoy all of the benefits in better computers and better communications? So they're looking at new computing architecture still in electronics, memory and processing, 3D architectures, new materials for electronics. And even beyond electronics, we think that the investments that we are considering and are making today in alternative computing are really going to change the definition of what we think as a computer. So if you keep in mind that hundreds of years ago, physical machines, gears and pulleys were computing anything from the moon cycles to tides. So notion of computer was really a physical machine. And then early in the 1900s, computer actually referred to a human doing mathematics and solving mathematical equations. With the evolution of electronics, computer now sort of connotes electronic computing. But in the future, if we're willing to sacrifice the generalizability of current electronic systems, we might be able to realize computing in totally different substrates. So for instance, we have an effort sort of exploring what might you be able to do in information storage and processing in molecules, DNA or different combinations of molecules. We know that molecules can store information extremely compactly. The analogy is that the entire corpus of human-generated data could be stored in DNA in the back of a pickup truck. Now, writing and reading to that is a real challenge at speeds that are relevant, but synthetic biology has actually driven those technologies to orders of magnitude improvement as well as orders of magnitude reduction in cost over the last decade. So if there might be certain types of applications where these alternative computing substrates might be purpose-built and might actually have an advantage over electronic computing approaches. So we're exploring those sorts of things. Another area, as we moved more and more towards a cloud-based society with sensors everywhere, we're really, as a society that really values our privacy, how do we maintain the required awareness that we want from these sensors while still preserving the privacy of our citizens? So I think there's work that we are looking into and investing in that I think is really going to be impactful in reaching those goals. Precision, personalized medicine, synthetic biology. We have a lot of investments in this area. There was just it's been reported, and if you might have seen, about the Ebola cure that is now in the process of being approved and deployed, and that's a huge breakthrough that in part came from Darpa investments. And again, as I mentioned before, as we develop these better design tools, we're going to be in a much better position to capitalize on all of these advancements in manufacturing and new materials. And our concepts of our sort of traditional platforms, ships, planes, cars, really could be transformed as we understand what really the art of the possible is if we actually are able to bring those advancements in materials and manufacturing to those platforms. So I have a couple minutes left. I could take one or two questions, but yes, please.
Good morning. Thank you very much. How does DARPA react, and it's broadly a question, when there's news of, excuse me, good morning and thank you. How does DARPA react generally when there's news of what happened in Russia, where there's an explosion on a missile or some type of system that Russia is developing? I'm going to guess you guys were aware that this process was underway, but when something like this happens, is there a specific reaction in DARPA, or what ensues, please?
Yeah, so certainly that's something that we try to avoid that surprise, right? We are not, we are not a service agent, military service, or so we're not going to react in that sense. We are constantly considering what the threat landscape is. So if we see something new on the horizon, that will lead us to, perhaps rethink our investment priority areas. But as you said, I don't think we were surprised that Russia, they've been talking about this, and so we are aware of it. But we're not going to turn on a dime based on something that necessarily happens. Again, if we are surprised, we try to avoid that. But if we are surprised, that might cause us to rethink our priorities. Mm-hmm.
So China has made artificial intelligence a major investment priority. Is there any way to gauge their capabilities as opposed to ours?
So, we get asked that question a lot. You can throw a lot of money at something, it doesn't mean it's money well spent. They seem to have really invested a lot in data. And they have different views on privacy protections, and so they do have a lot of data. Whether there is information value in that data that we don't have access to or we need, I don't know. But my sense, this is just me talking, is that much of their investments have been in acquiring data and the data mining tools. And then a lot of it seems to be trying to chase what we already are able to do here. So I would say, and DARPA can speak from this from a bit of an authority, as we have been in the AI game from the very beginning, and much of our early investments, let's show that timeline, have actually, decades later, you can directly trace the arc to new capabilities that we have today. So I'm quite confident that the investments that are being made by the U.S. today are being made smartly. I don't have a lot of insight into how all of China's investments, but a lot of it does seem to be in trying to acquire data that may or may not be useful. Yeah, okay, I think I have to call it right here. Thank you.